work in the Danish lifecycle DNVC team in Copenhagen and Denmark. I have a master's degree in... Sorry? You can remove your master. Okay. I have a master's degree in public health from the University of Copenhagen, and now I'm here visiting UNITO on a 2-month lifecycle fellowship. So what I will talk about today is my lifecycle project on social inequalities in childhood asthma in the EU Child Cohort Network, the mediating role of modifiable early life risk factors. And I did this project in collaboration with the Danish DNVC team. If I can manage to change. Yeah. Is it this? Okay, so just to kind of introduce the project, I did this life cycle project as my master's project or master's thesis at UCPH, or the University of Copenhagen, where I included data from 3 European birth cohorts from the life cycle EU Child Cohort Network, and I conducted all my analysis in the so-called data shield analysis platform. And for those of you who doesn't know that platform, I will get back to that in a minute. And the aim of our study was overall 2 things. First of all, we wanted to examine how childhood socioeconomic conditions influence the prevalence of childhood asthma at school age. And second, to investigate how 4 specific early life risk factors mediate the pathways by which childhood socioeconomic conditions influence childhood asthma at school age. And the 4 early life risk factors that we chose to look at were maternal smoking during pregnancy, mode of delivery, breastfeeding, and exposure to passive smoking within the 2 first years of life. And we chose to look at these 4 early life risk factors due to their association with socioeconomic position and also their association to the risk of asthma, and mainly because we could argue that they could be modifiable and hereby amenable to public health intervention. As I already mentioned, I have data from the 3 European birth cohorts, so I included data from the British cohort LSPAC, the Danish cohort DNVC, and the Italian cohort Menfea. And to kind of answer the first part of our research question, we did logistic regression analysis. And to answer the second part and then examine the mediating pathways, we did mediation analysis based on the counterfactual framework using this special mediation function package that has been implemented in DataShield, which includes similar functions to the native R package Medflix, if you're familiar with that one. And then now, yes, I am visiting UNITO here and trying to expand my project to additional cohorts. I just started working on the Norwegian data in MOBA and the French data in Eden. And then I'm also trying to revise some of my analysis and write my project up as a scientific paper. Okay, so this slide is just a little bit about what DataShield is. As I mentioned before, I conducted all my analysis in this analysis platform, and DataShield is an R-based analysis platform in which individual level data are analyzed and assessed remotely. So it kind of the individual level data belonging to each of the cohorts stays at the home institutions and can only be assessed with remote access. And then I kind of included this illustration to kind of show how the architecture of DataShield and kind of the IT infrastructure setup of my initial project. So the gray circle here kind of represents the analysis computer where I conducted all the analysis from. And the red circles here are the data computers in the UK with the LSPAC data, and in Italy with the Menfea data, and in Denmark with the DNVC data. And as you can see here, this kind of setup works that I send R commands to the national or local data computers, and what I receive is only non-disclosive summary statistics. So there is no actual transferring of physical data. So I guess that one of the main advantages of using DataShield is that it kind of enables researchers to co-analyze cohort data across Europe without physically uniting transferring data that are sensitive. Yes, and now I'll talk a little bit about the assessment of some of the key variables in our study, or the definition of the key variables. So as I already said, our outcome of interest was childhood asthma at school age, and we defined childhood asthma as an asthma diagnosis according to the middle definition, yes or no. And the middle definition of asthma constitutes a questionnaire-based definition of asthma in children and also adolescents, based on the often parental report of respiratory symptoms, doctor diagnosis, and intake of asthma medication. And in the cohorts in the EU Child Cohort Network, current childhood asthma according to this middle definition is based on having at least 2 of the following 3 criteria. So 1, a doctor diagnosed asthma, and 2, wheezing in the past 12 months, and or 3, use of asthma medication in the past 12 months. And to kind of examine social inequalities, we work with childhood socioeconomic conditions as our exposure. And in general, childhood socioeconomic conditions refer to the socioeconomic conditions surrounding the child. So that can be measured, for example, by using parental education, household income, or measure like area deprivation. And in our study, we use the maternal education level at child's birth to indicate childhood socioeconomic conditions. So our exposure consisted of a categorical variable with 3 categories: high, medium, or low maternal educational level. And then, as I already said, we worked with 4 mediators. Maternal smoking during pregnancy we assessed as any maternal smoking during pregnancy, yes or no. Mode of delivery we examined as whether the child was born by a C-section, and breastfeeding we examined as a categorical mediator with 3 categories. So never breastfed below 6 months, equal or above 6 months. And then passive smoking within the first 2 years we defined as any smoking from mother, biological father, social father, any smokers close to the child, or exposure to smoke in the home environment. So what did we find? First of all, we conducted all our analysis separately in the birth cohorts, so we did not meta-analyze anything. And we did this kind of to try and elucidate potential different findings across different European country contexts. So as you can see here, we work with different study populations in the different cohorts. And overall, we found a prevalence of childhood asthma among British children in Elspec of 16%. Among the Danish children, we found an overall prevalence of 5.8%. And among the children in Nenfea, we found a smaller overall prevalence of 2.2%. And in MOBA, we found a prevalence of 5.5%, and in Eden, 7.5%. So you can see that these overall prevalences differ across the cohorts, with the highest in Elspec and the lowest in Nenfea. And then I included this table here to kind of show that we found that the prevalence of asthma at school age was socially distributed in Elspec and in BC and MOBA, with the highest prevalence of childhood asthma at school age among children with low educated mothers, and the lowest prevalence of childhood asthma at school age among the children with high educated mothers. And as you can also see, among the Nenfea children, we did not find any evidence for a social gradient. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that there are none, but as you can see, there are very few cases of asthma in the Nenfea cohort. And then the Eden one is blank because I didn't do these analyses yet. And then after controlling for potential confounders in logistic regression, we found similar results to the one presented here, that children from high, medium, low socioeconomic conditions had lower odds of childhood asthma at school age than children from low childhood socioeconomic conditions in the LSPAC and the NBC cohort. And also in line with this table, in NFEA, we found no difference in the odds of childhood asthma at school age when comparing disadvantaged children to more advanced peers. And I have not yet done the regression analysis in mobile EE. And then I included this graph to kind of illustrate the overall mediation analysis of interest in our study. This is a directed acyclic graph, also known as a DAG. And as you can see here, which I also already said, that we use maternal educational level at child's birth to indicate childhood socioeconomic conditions and our outcome of interest. Then I put the 4 mediators that we examined here in this block. And then up here, you can see that we identified parental history of asthma, maternal age at birth, and maternal ethnicity as potential confounders. And then I wrote parity out here because the results that I'm going to present to you in a moment have not been adjusted for parity, but I think that it would maybe be a good idea. So I'll try to do that when I have time. And then also I wrote preterm birth weight down here to kind of indicate adverse reproductive outcomes, which is put outside the box also because I did not yet include it in the analysis, but I plan to include it as a potential mediator also. Yes, so what kind of mediation analysis did we do? Well, first of all, we did mediation analysis to try to answer our second part of our research question, which was to investigate how early life risk factors mediate the pathways by which childhood socioeconomic conditions influence childhood asthma. So kind of to suggest possible public health interventions to better childhood respiratory health. And then my impression is, or also in the literature, that you can use kind of many different mediation strategies and do kind of different analysis based on different assumptions. But what we did was we used the so-called imputation strategy as implemented in the data shield mediation package, where we fitted natural effect models to kind of decompose the total effect of childhood socioeconomic conditions on childhood asthma into effects acting through different combinations of the 4 early life mediators, the so-called natural indirect effects, and into mechanisms bypassing these mediators, the so-called natural direct effects. And because we hypothesized that the 4 early life mediators were interdependent or correlated or depended on each other, we chose to examine them using a so-called sequential approach. So what we did was that we added the mediators one by one to the analysis according to the causal order of which we expected them to affect one another, as well as according to their timing of measurement. Using this approach resulted in 4 different natural effect models in each of the 3 birth cohorts. And we did all the natural effect models as logistic regression models. We might change it to using Poisson regression and estimation of prevalence ratios instead, due to some issues with the logistic regression models. But the results I'm going to present now will be based on logistic regression. And then furthermore, we based our results on 2 different comparisons because we assessed our exposure as a categorical variable. So there will be results for children with high versus low childhood socioeconomic conditions, so high versus low maternal educational level, and for children with medium versus low childhood socioeconomic conditions. So yes, kind of using this entire approach kind of resulted in 2 large tables with results. So this is the first table, and as you can see up here, it compares children with high versus low childhood socioeconomic conditions. And then before interpreting the results, I would like to talk a little bit about how to understand this table, because it can be a little complicated to look at. So here we have the columns for the 3 birth cohorts, so LSPAC, PNVC, and NFEA. And out here we have the 4 different natural effect models, so model A, B, C, and D. And the first model here only includes or only assesses maternal smoking during pregnancy as mediator, whereas model B adds on mode of delivery. So it assists 2 mediators, and then further model C adds on breastfeeding. So here we assess 3 mediators, and then finally, in the final natural effect model B, we assess all the 4 mediators combined. And then here in the next column, you can see that we estimated a total effect and a natural indirect effect and a natural direct effect for each of the 4 natural effect models. And the total effect gives the effect of the exposure on the outcome without decomposing into any specific pathways of interest, whereas the natural indirect effects kind of gives the effect of changing the mediator level, changing the level of the mediator, and then the natural direct effect gives the effect when changing the level of the exposure. And then, as you can see here, in this column, we also calculated the more intuitive measure proportion mediated, the so-called PM. However, as this table also illustrates here in the NBC and for an NFEA, this measure is not always meaningful. It is especially not meaningful when the natural direct effect and the natural indirect effect goes in opposite directions, or the total effect is close to 0. Then it can blow out of proportion, as is the case here. Also, as you can see from this table, we didn't calculate confidence intervals. So the results and conclusions in this study are based on the natural effect estimates. And what I think is interesting in this of the results in this table is that in ELSPEC we see a natural indirect effect of assessing maternal smoking during pregnancy, which means that if we change the level of maternal smoking during pregnancy naturally observed at low maternal educational level to the level naturally observed at high maternal educational level, we can decrease the odds with 9%. And then when we add on mode of delivery, nothing really happens. But then when we add on breastfeeding, we see a natural indirect effect in ELSPEC as well as in DNBC. So how to interpret this odds ratio of 0.83 is that if we manage to change the level of maternal smoking during pregnancy, mode of delivery, and breastfeeding, which is naturally observed at low maternal educational level, to the level naturally observed at high maternal educational level, we can decrease the odds of childhood asthma at school age with 70% and 4% in DNBC. And then when we add passive exposure to passive smoking in the first 2 years, it doesn't really change modern ELSPEC, whereas the effect, the natural indirect effect seems to disappear in the DNBC cohort. And then the NFEA results are not that precise. This is the other of the 2 large tables. So this table compares children with medium versus low childhood socioeconomic conditions. And it can be, it is equivalent to the other table. But what I think is nice in this table to see is that we see kind of the same pattern that we see and natural indirect effect of maternal smoking during pregnancy and ELSPEC, even though it is smaller. And then when we add on breastfeeding, we also see an effect, whereas we don't see anything in the DNBC cohort. So kind of the same pattern, but smaller effects, definitely. Yes. So what is the main takeaways? Until now, our study has found important social differences in the prevalence of childhood asthma at school age in the United Kingdom, as well as in Denmark, with children from lower childhood socioeconomic conditions suffering disproportionately from asthma in childhood. And then it will be interesting to see what we find in Nova and Eden. And the effect estimates from the natural effect models from the mediation analysis in this study suggest that maternal smoking during pregnancy and breastfeeding might be important pathways to social inequalities in childhood asthma at school age. So in order to improve childhood health and reduce social inequalities in childhood asthma, public health interventions should target and promote breastfeeding as well as eliminate maternal smoking during pregnancy. Yes. Okay. So
we can open the discussion.
Yes.
You can also open the button.
Otherwise I might not be able to see like this.
Thank you, Anne. I think we can open the discussion both in the room here and from the people that are logging from far away. If somebody wants to speak from the class, you can come and speak here so people hear without an editor repeating the question as well. I have a question. You start to break the ice. You said you intend to adjust for parity. Intended as a confounder in the relationship between maternal education and asthma. So I was wondering why considering parity as a confounder, meaning a cause, something that comes before the education of the mothers. I'm sure there's a reason for that, because it seems kind of counterintuitive. It seems that it's the socioeconomic status of the mother that determines parity somehow.
Yeah, but I agree, but I think that the idea of including parity as a potential confounder was to kind of adjust for the selection bias into the cohorts, because the cohorts consist of pregnant women giving birth. So that was the main reason, but I agree with you that you can maybe also argue that the arrow points the other way. But I think I will try to include it to account for this selection bias, and then maybe see what happens with the results. Would you disagree to include it?
I didn't think.
Yeah. I can also.
So parity in this sense, parity would lower the probability of inclusion in the core. Or would it do it differentially for women of high and low socioeconomic position?
I think it was kind of to even out the social inequality, or how a socioeconomic position affect your parity. But I agree that you could also argue that the arrow goes the other way. Yeah.
May I comment on this, Milena?
Yes.
Okay. I think we discussed this with Anne actually, and I think that one point is that these birth cohorts are carried out in pregnant women. At recruitment, at least, women should be pregnant by definition, and so parity is a determinant of whether you would get pregnant or not. And the same thing is also maternal education is a determinant of the pregnancy. So in a way, when you restrict your study in pregnant women, you induce an association between maternal education and parity, which may be treated as a confounder, but is due to the collider bias at baseline that happens in the population, given the fact that the study is carried out in pregnant women. Yeah, so I agree with Anne's approach to see what happens when you adjust for birth parity, and parity might be considered a confounder, not because it's a cause of maternal education, but because it's a determinant of getting pregnant. depending on the number of children you already have, then your probability of getting pregnant is different, and the study restricted to pregnant women.
Okay, clear. Thank you. A good idea, I think. Jovenal?
I'm saying I'm not an expert on mediation analysis, so please stop me or Lorenzo if I'm saying something stupid. The thing is this one, if I'm not wrong, I remember from my lessons on mediation analysis that natural effect, like indirect and direct effect, are the ones that you estimate if you bring the mediator level to the level of the one that are not exposed.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
I was thinking there is also another direct effect, is the control direct effect, is the one when you fix the level of a mediator to a specific level. Watching here, you're also Doug.
You want me to go back?
Yeah, no, I was saying maybe this is the case. Have you thought about estimating the control direct effect? Because you can control that. I think the mediator level, like the breastfeeding, so actually the smoking level. If you do some campaign, you can target the mediator level instead of acting more on the socioeconomic status. So I would like to ask you if you thought about trying to estimate this effect. Also, Lorenzo intervenes and saying something stupid. Okay.
But if I understand your question correctly, I think that what my impression is that what we can use these results to, in terms of what to intervene on, is that we can see from the estimates from these natural indirect effects how much we could lower the odds of childhood asthma if we, by using an intervention, manage to, for example, decrease the maternal smoking levels from the higher level that we see at the lower educational level to the lower smoking level we see at higher educational level.
Yeah.
But
yeah, no, okay, yeah. So yeah, this is when you use a marginal effect, you estimate that you're bringing the mediator level to the average level of the higher education. I was asking if it makes sense also to estimate the control direct when you assume that you bring to all exposed people the mediator level to zero. I don't know if I'm saying something that doesn't make sense.
I don't think. I'm not sure about this question.
Okay, no.
I think it's a great point.
No, I mean, because actually I studied 2 years ago, but if I'm not wrong, there is this way of, you can decompose the effect in different ways. There is the natural direct and natural indirect effect. There is also the control direct effect. Is when you assume that you fix the level of the mediator to a value for everyone, that it would be not smoking. I don't know. Lorenzo is my
Giovenale, since you asked, can I give my opinion on this? I don't know if you are hearing me or not. I assume you are hearing me. Basically, I think here, if I understand well, the idea is to explain the socio-economic inequalities. So why people with low socioeconomic class or position have a higher risk of asthma. This is why then, if you want to answer to that specific question, I think that the natural effects are more likely to give you the answer, because you are not assuming that you will bring, let's say, the whole population to lack of exposure to the mediators, but you are trying to see what would happen if those in the low socioeconomic position would have the same behaviors for what regards the mediator as the other people in the population. And this is how you can explain the mechanism that is involved. Then the second step is if you want to do an intervention. Of course, if you want to do an intervention, it's very difficult to say I mean, you could think of an intervention to bring the people with low socioeconomic class to the same level as people with high socioeconomic position, but is a bit unclear what the intervention would be. So if you speak about intervention, then you could think of fixing the mediators that you were saying to a control level. And this would, however, be for the whole population, not only for those with low socioeconomic position. So you could say, well, if we fix it, if we do an intervention, then the socioeconomic differences, inequalities disappear. But then there is the effect of the intervention itself, which would also affect those with high socioeconomic position. This is why I think in this kind of analysis, the natural effects would be more interesting because are closer to the understanding the involved mechanisms.
Okay. Thank you.
Patrick? I want to know why you chose that order to as the mediator.
This is a very good question, and also we discussed the order a lot. But I guess that we decided to use this order based on what comes first and what affects what. So that is why we put the vaccination to pregnancy first, and then delivery, first feeding, and passively smooth exposure in the first 2 years. But I guess
It will change the effect if you put a different order.
Mm. Mm. I think because we analyze them combined, that for example in model B we have return smoking and mode of delivery, and in model C we have all three, and in model D we have all four. The order maybe doesn't really matter because
In the end.
yeah, in the end. But yeah, but I guess you could also argue that breastfeeding kind of happens at the same time as some of the passive smoking, but we discussed the protocol than us. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Another questions?
Hi. No, I know that we discussed about the fifth mediator to address pregnancy outcomes yesterday. But now when I heard your presentation, I was thinking that because you said you selected, of course, your mediators because they are somehow modifiable. So including adverse pregnancy outcomes would a bit change this, because although it is possible to intervene on the birth rate and gestation rate, I think it's more difficult to have interventions on which are directed to these. And I don't know, just to it would be difficult to fit in the overall picture how you present it, because these are less modifiable compared to other factors.
I agree, but I guess maybe you could argue that these kind of indicate high risk pregnancies. Then maybe you could argue that you can design some interventions to lower the amount of high risk pregnancies. But otherwise, I agree that
You can intervene on the factors that are risk factors.
yeah, exactly. But
Okay, no,
yeah, but nice.
Anybody else wants to ask something? Just out of curiosity, I mean, the prevalences of asthma are really, really very different in the three countries. So, was it expected?
I guess some of it was because other previous studies have found that, for example, the prevalence of child asthma and also recently the UK is very high. And then also when you compare it to the results in the failure is very low. We also have to talk to Maya some weeks ago was that in Italy you only kind of diagnose the most severe cases. Yeah.
Okay.
Where you might also be more, I don't know, prone to diagnose in the UK but compared to previous findings, there is this very high prevalence among British children.
Yeah.
But it is kind of, you notice the difference.
Yeah. So it is. Now it really makes you think of a different pattern of risk factors.
Yeah.
A geographical distribution of risk factors, which is very peculiar and very specific.
And I guess it also was like kind of measure the same asthma
Oh, yeah,
outcome.
of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also in study,
Yeah.
what is dynamic, because also there may be differences in the diagnostic process between the countries and in the labeling children and not not.
And did you try to use reading as an outcome?
I have not run the analysis for that, but I looked at the prevalence. I think it's something like 5 point something.
In there.
Yeah, and then so yeah, so
That's
it's definitely high.
higher.
Yeah, yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, is anybody that is from somewhere else, out of this room, that wants to ask any questions? The rest want to comment on anything? No.
I'll have to say something about the journal club next week, I think, but I can do this later when the discussion finished.
I think it is finished because we have no further questions, so I want to thank Anna again. Thank you, and okay,